11 top players boycott Rolap's mandatory international postseason tour. Fields ruined. This isn't clickbait. It's a full-blown power struggle inside professional golf. 11 of the game's biggest names just said no to PGA Tour CEO Brian Rolap. He pushed a mandatory international postseason schedule, and these players pushed back, hard. And honestly, the pure frustration makes me want to throw my remote at the TV. Regular fans are saving money for months just to watch one tournament. Yet these country club millionaires are complaining about playing more golf. It's a joke. They're already making millions, and now they're acting like being forced to play in international events is some kind of punishment. It proves these guys care about nothing but their own convenience. But look past the outrage. These 11 players aren't just being difficult. They're fighting something much bigger. Rolap's mandatory tour is a clever trap designed to shift all the risk onto the players. It forces them to play more events, travel further, and burn out faster. Meanwhile, the tour collects the revenue. Let me show you exactly how this works, who these players are, and why Fields ruined is only the beginning. Personally, I think the players have a real point here. Do you agree with them, or do you think they're overreacting? Drop your take below. And if you want the real story behind golf's biggest power fight, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next. To understand why these 11 players said no, you first need to understand who they're saying no to. Brian Rolap arrived as the new CEO of the PGA Tour in 2026. He came straight from the NFL, where he spent years building broadcast deals and squeezing every dollar out of media rights. The guy knows money. He knows how to package sports for television. But here's the thing. Golf is not football. You don't get to call timeout. You don't get to huddle up and reset. Golf is 18 individual battles playing out across 4 days, and the players have always had a say in how the schedule works. Rolap had a different idea. He wanted to remake the whole thing. His first moves were subtle. Field sizes got smaller. Tournaments that used to have 156 players dropped down to 144. Smaller events shrank even more. Then came the real shock. He cut the number of fully exempt tour cards from 125 down to 100. 25 players who used to have guaranteed jobs suddenly had nothing. The tour said the changes were about pace of play. They said smaller fields would speed things up. Players didn't buy it for a second. Lucas Glover called the explanation insulting. He said you don't cut 25 guys just to shave a few minutes off a round. That's not about pace. That's about control. And Glover wasn't the only one who spoke up. Matt Fitzpatrick backed him publicly. Fitzpatrick said it was pathetic that the pace of play issue comes up every single year and nothing ever gets done. So why are we cutting fields now? What's the real reason? That question hung in the air for weeks. Then came the press conference. March 2026. Rolap stood in front of the cameras and laid out his vision. 6 major themes. Signature events doubling from 8 to 16. A 2-tier system with promotion and relegation. The season moving from January to September. The Tour Championship rotating to new venues. And one more thing. A new international postseason series. Mandatory, no opt-out. Every top player had to participate. That press conference changed everything. What Rolap thought was a bold vision, the players saw as a threat. And the ones who reacted the strongest? They weren't the ones you'd expect. Some of the biggest names in golf decided they'd had enough. Rory McIlroy was one of the first to raise concerns. McIlroy had only played 11 tournaments this season. The tour's minimum requirement is 15. But Rolap used his CEO power to keep McIlroy's membership active. He called it a special exemption for international players. The other players called it something else. Favoritism. They watched the CEO bend the rules for golf's biggest star while cutting tour cards for 25 guys on the bottom. The message was loud and clear. Some players matter more than others. That decision alone could have torn the locker room apart. But McIlroy wasn't the only one who benefited from special treatment. Scottie Scheffler, the world #1, found himself in a similar position. Scheffler had also played fewer than the required 15 events, and just like McIlroy, Rolap granted him an exemption. Scheffler didn't ask for it. He didn't campaign for it, but he took it, and that created a split among the players. Some said Scheffler deserved it. He's the best in the world. He's won 4 majors. Others saw it differently. They saw 2 players getting special treatment while everyone else had to follow the rules. The resentment was building, and Rolap kept pushing forward. Then he announced the mandatory international postseason, and that's when everything exploded. The plan was simple on paper. After the Tour Championship, the top players would travel overseas for a series of events. 4 tournaments, 4 different countries. The Tour said it would grow the game globally. They said it would bring golf to new audiences. They said the players should be proud to represent the Tour on an international stage. The players saw it differently. They saw a schedule that never ended. They saw mandatory travel during what was supposed to be their off-season. They saw more wear and tear on their bodies, more time away from their families, and more revenue going to the Tour while they did all the work. And they weren't willing to accept it. Matt Fitzpatrick was one of the first to speak out publicly. He said the current playoff format is already a problem. He pointed to Colin Morikawa's situation a few years ago. Morikawa entered the playoffs ranked 3rd in the FedEx Cup standings. He had won a major that year. He had played great golf all season, but because he had 3 bad weeks in the playoffs, he finished around 25th and lost out on millions of dollars in bonus money. Fitzpatrick's point was simple. You shouldn't have to prove yourself all over again after you've already proved yourself all year. And now Rolap wanted to add even more events after the playoffs? It didn't make sense to the players. It felt like the Tour was moving further away from rewarding the best golf and closer to chasing every possible dollar. But Fitzpatrick's concerns were just the surface. The real problem was what this mandatory tour would do to the players' bodies and minds. Professional golfers already travel more than almost any other athletes. They're on the road for 30 weeks a year. They fly across time zones. They adjust to different climates and different grasses and different cultures. It's exhausting. And now Rolap wanted them to add international events during their supposed break. That meant less time to recover, less time to train, less time with their families, more risk of injury, more risk of burnout, more risk of simply walking away from the game altogether. The players who had already been through the grind knew exactly what this meant, and they were scared. Justin Thomas was another player who felt strongly about the changes. Thomas had been one of the most vocal critics of the Tour's direction. He'd called the USGA's decisions selfish. He'd compared rolling back the golf ball to raising the basketball hoop because players could jump higher. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind. And when Rolap unveiled his mandatory postseason, Thomas didn't hold back. He said the players needed a seat at the table. He said decisions were being made without consulting the people who actually play the game. He demanded changes to the playoff format itself, arguing that the current system was broken and needed a complete overhaul. Thomas was right. The players were being treated like employees instead of partners. And that's exactly what Rolap wanted. He came from the NFL, where players have very little power. The league makes the rules. The teams follow them. The players show up and play. That's how Rolap thought golf should work too. But golf isn't the NFL. The PGA Tour doesn't own the players. The players own the Tour. At least, that's how it used to work. Brooks Koepka learned this lesson the hard way. Koepka was one of the first players to return from LIV Golf. He joined the returning member program and got his PGA Tour card back, but he paid a massive price. He had to give up between $50 and $85 million in tour equity that he would have earned if he'd stayed. That's the penalty for leaving. And when he came back, things weren't the same. The players who had stayed didn't trust him, the tour didn't welcome him, and his game suffered. Koepka played 16 tournaments after his return. He finished 94th in the FedEx Cup standings. He didn't make the playoffs. He called his performance pathetic. That's his word, not mine. Pathetic. Here was a player who had won 5 majors, a player who had dominated the biggest stages in golf. And now he was struggling to even qualify for the postseason. The game he'd once mastered was beating him down, and the tour that he'd returned to didn't seem to care. Koepka's situation sent a message to every other player thinking about returning from LIV. You will pay a price. But while Koepka was fighting his way back, other players were making different decisions. Jon Rahm was one of them. Rahm had been linked to a potential return to the PGA Tour. Reports suggested that a deal was already in place. But when asked about it, Rory McIlroy didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. McIlroy said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the returning players wouldn't exactly be welcomed with open arms. The resentment was real. The players who had stayed felt betrayed by the ones who left. And now that LIV Golf was falling apart, the players who left wanted back in. It was like watching someone walk away from their family, then show up at the holiday dinner expecting everyone to act like nothing happened. It didn't work that way. And the tension only got worse when LIV Golf announced its future. In August 2026, LIV Golf made a major announcement. They had found new investors. They were planning to host 10 events in 2027. The Saudi money hadn't completely dried up after all. But the players knew the truth. LIV was a shell of what it used to be. The tournament fields were thinner. The prize money was lower. The excitement was gone. And the players who had bet their careers on LIV were starting to realize they had made a terrible mistake. That's when the boycott started to take shape. 11 players, 11 names. Some of them were LIV defectors trying to come back. Some of them had never left the PGA Tour, but they all shared one thing: a deep distrust of Brian Rolap and his mandatory international postseason plan. Lucas Glover was one of the most outspoken. Glover called the reform package terrible. He said the tour was too focused on money and not focused enough on the players. He said the game was being hollowed out from the inside. And he wasn't alone. The players began organizing in ways the tour hadn't seen before. Private group chats, late-night phone calls, meetings in hotel rooms during tournaments. They talked about what the mandatory postseason would mean. They talked about their families, their health, their futures. They talked about whether they should take a stand. And eventually, they decided they had no choice. They released a joint statement. 11 signatures. 11 players willing to risk their careers to send a message. The message was simple: we will not play in the mandatory international postseason. And if the tour tries to force us, we will consider legal action. The golf world went crazy. Commentators and analysts predicted the end of the PGA Tour as we knew it. Sponsors called the tour offices demanding answers. Fans flooded social media with their opinions. Some supported the players. Some supported the tour. But everyone was talking about it. And that was exactly what the players wanted. But here's the question everyone was asking: who exactly were these 11 players? The first name on the list shocked everyone: Rory McIlroy, the same player who had received special treatment from Rolapp, the same player who had played only 11 events that season, the same player who was supposed to be the CEO's biggest ally. He was now leading the rebellion. McIlroy's decisions stunned the golf world. He had always been the bridge between the players and the tour. He had always tried to find compromise. But even McIlroy had reached his limit. He couldn't support a mandatory postseason that would break the players. The second name was Scottie Scheffler, the world #1, the same player who had also received special treatment. Scheffler's signature on the boycott statement sent a powerful message. If the best player in the world can't support this plan, how can the tour expect anyone else to? Scheffler didn't want to be a rebel. He just wanted to play golf. But he believed the mandatory postseason was wrong, and he wasn't afraid to say so. The third name was Lucas Glover, the veteran, the one who had called the tour's explanations insulting. Glover had been warning about these problems for months, and now he was putting his career on the line to stop them. He didn't have the same star power as McIlroy or Scheffler, but he had credibility, and the players respected him for speaking the truth. The fourth name was Matt Fitzpatrick, the US Open champion, the European voice in a predominantly American tour. Fitzpatrick's signature added international weight to the boycott. He'd already been critical of the playoff format. Now he was taking a stand against the mandatory postseason. The fifth name was Justin Thomas, the major champion who had called for real change. Thomas had been a vocal critic of the tour's direction. Now he was backing up his words with action. His name on the boycott statement gave legitimacy to the players' cause. He wasn't some angry fringe player. He was one of the biggest stars in the game. The sixth name was Brooks Koepka, the 5-time major winner who had already been through hell trying to return. Koepka had nothing left to lose. He'd been treated like an outsider. He'd lost millions of dollars. He'd struggled to compete, and now he was joining the boycott to send a message. The tour's treatment of returning players was unacceptable, and Koepka was willing to risk his career to prove it. The seventh name was Bryson DeChambeau, the LIV star who had once called the USGA's decisions atrocious. DeChambeau had been out of the PGA Tour spotlight for years, but his involvement in the boycott showed that the LIV players and the PGA Tour players could unite against a common enemy. Even Bryson DeChambeau, who had been one of the most controversial players in the game, was willing to stand with his fellow players. The eighth name was Jon Rahm, the former world #1, the player who had been rumored to be returning. Rahm's presence on the boycott list sent a clear signal. Even the players who wanted to come back to the PGA Tour were willing to fight against it. They weren't just trying to get back in. They were trying to change the system from the inside. The ninth name was Cameron Smith, the British Open champion, one of the most talented players to leave for LIV. Smith's signature showed that the boycott wasn't just about American players, it was about all players. The mandatory postseason would affect everyone equally, and everyone was tired of being treated like pawns. The 10th name was Patrick Reed, the former Masters champion. Reed had been one of the most polarizing figures in golf, but on this issue, he stood with his fellow players. Reed's involvement added another major champion to the list. The boycott had real star power now. The 11th name was Phil Mickelson, the legend, the man who had become the face of LIV Golf. Mickelson hadn't even played in the PGA Championship that year. His career was winding down, but he still had a voice, and he used it to support his fellow players. Mickelson's signature was a symbolic gesture. It showed that even the players who had left were still part of the golf family, and they weren't going to stand by while the tour tried to destroy their sport. 11 players, 11 names, 11 different stories, but they all shared one thing. They were fed up with the direction of professional golf. And they weren't only ones. Fans were angry too. They wanted to see the best players in the world compete. They wanted to see tournaments with strong fields and exciting finishes. And now they were being told that the mandatory postseason would feature weaker fields. The top players were boycotting. The tournaments would be ruined. The fields would be garbage. What's the point of watching a tournament if the best players aren't even playing? That's the question fans were asking, and it's the question that sponsors were asking too. Sponsors pay millions of dollars to be associated with PGA Tour events. They don't pay for second-rate tournaments. They pay for star power. They pay for drama. They pay for the best players competing on the biggest stages. And now they were being told that the best players wouldn't be showing up. The sponsors were furious, and they were making phone calls. The tour tried to calm things down. They released statements about working toward a compromise. They said they would listen to player concerns, but the players had heard that before. They'd heard it when the field sizes were cut. They'd heard it when the tour cards were slashed. They'd heard it when the mandatory postseason was announced. And every time, the tour did what they wanted anyway. This time, the players weren't going to let it happen. The boycott was scheduled to begin after the Tour Championship. The players had made it clear they would not be boarding those flights. They would not be playing in those events. And if Tour tried to penalize them, they would fight it every step of the way. Now the ball was in Rolap's court. Could he find a way to bring the players back to the table? Or was the mandatory postseason dead on arrival? The players were united. The sponsors were angry. The fans were confused. And the tour was scrambling. The entire future of the PGA Tour was hanging in the balance. Brian Rolap had a choice to make. He could back down and negotiate with the players. He could try to find a middle ground that everyone could accept. Or he could dig in and force a confrontation that might tear the tour apart. The players were waiting. The sponsors were watching. Fans were hoping for a resolution, but nobody knew what was going to happen next. What we do know is this. 11 players changed the conversation. They didn't just complain. They didn't just tweet their frustrations. They organized. They united. And they forced the most powerful man in golf to listen. And they're not done yet. The mandatory international postseason may or may not happen, but the players have made their point. They're not just employees. They're not just pieces on a board. They're the people who make this sport what it is. And they're willing to risk everything to protect it. That's the real story here. That's why this matters. It's not just about one tournament or one schedule change. It's about who runs professional golf. The players or the executives. The people who swing the clubs or the people who count the money. And right now, the players are winning. But the fight is far from over. Rolap isn't going to give up easily. He came from the NFL. He's used to getting his way. He's used to players falling in line. He's not going to roll over just because 11 players said no. He'll negotiate. He'll compromise. He'll try to find a way to save face while giving the players enough to keep them happy. And that's what makes this story so compelling. It's not over. It's just getting started. The mandatory international postseason might be dead, or it might come back in a different form. The boycott might end in victory for the players, or it might end in defeat. We don't know yet. Nobody knows. What we do know is this. The players have shown they can't be ignored. The tour has shown they can be challenged. And the fans have shown they care about what happens. That's a good thing for golf. Because for too long, the people running the sport have been making decisions without listening to the people who actually play it. And that's not sustainable. This boycott is a wake-up call, and it's loud and clear. The future of golf isn't going to be determined by one man in an office. It's going to be determined by the players on the course. They're the ones who create the moments we remember. They're the ones who hit shots we celebrate. And they're the ones who deserve a say in how their sport is run. 11 players stood up. 11 players said enough. And 11 players changed everything.